Welcome to 3-Point Summary. The ideas, opinions, and discussions of this podcast are those of the host, co-host, and guest and do not necessarily represent the views of their respective employers or affiliates. Recording and propagation of this podcast is highly encouraged as long as an acknowledgement is given to the ownership. Music and graphics used in the podcast and promotional materials cannot be used in other events not tied to the podcast without the express written consent from Alpha Omega Advisors. Thanks for joining us. I am your host, Dave Summit. My co-host is Andrew Risch. The 3-Point Cyber podcast began this year with the intention of having simple discussions with subject matter experts in the field of cyber. These discussions are intentionally kept at high levels so that those interested in the field but are not actually in the field can understand cyber topics. Along with executive leaders and senior leaders that want to learn more about cyber but don't know where to turn, the target audience are those who have an interest in or may want to enter the cyber field. Each episode is released every 2 weeks, and we just finished recording episode number 12. As the name suggests, our goal is to extract 3 main points about the episode that we want the listener to take. Now that we have a couple of months under our belts, I thought we should produce the summary 3 points for each episode. So now with every episode, a corresponding summary episode will be made and released at a later date. You can listen to the summary and then go back and listen to the entire discussion to understand why the 3 points were important, along with getting other valuable information from each guest. So without further delay, the following summary is summary number 1 taken from episode number 1 with guest Dan Lohrmann. Welcome back to 3-Point Cyber. We just finished hearing from Dan Lohrmann, a well-respected thought leader in the cyber industry. From our discussions, here are the 3 points we would like for you to take away from this episode. So, Andrew, I want you to help me out here with this. What I've got is our very first one, and Dan's still with us, by the way. So, Dan, feel free to comment on these three points that we would really like to be taken from here. So, the first one I have is no one is immune. I think that's the very first one that I want everyone to understand. No one is immune to a cyber attack. The attacks will only continue. How you prepare will determine how well you handle the incident. Don't ignore the threats and don't bury your head in the sand. So you need to own the issue. From a PR perspective, it's much better to be proactive than wait until something happens and then look foolish in front of the public by saying, we didn't know. So, Dan, you have something that you'd like to add on that one?
Yeah, I just want to say that, there's so many practical, simple things people can do. And a lot of people blame it on it's too expensive, it's too costly. Many of these are free. So, I mean, even like if you use Gmail, Yahoo, use Facebook, LinkedIn, these common websites, most of them offer two-factor authentication. And maybe you have some sensitive banking information. People ask me if I'm doing online banking, I do. But I always use multi-factor authentication. And maybe you can have another episode just explaining all that to people. But it's not as hard as people think. It's usually a one-time thing. You click on it, trust this computer, and then from then on, it's really a simple password. So, but like 75% of Americans, even though it's free, don't use multi-factor authentication. 1 in 4 use it. So even there's so many practical tips that we can all put into place. If there's one thing I tell everybody to do, one thing you can take away on a personal level, it would be to turn on two-factor or multi-factor authentication on all of your online accounts, your social media accounts, your email accounts, and make sure it's being protected.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate that. So let's move to number 2. I would like for everyone to take away that to help fight this, specifically for business, there are 3 plans that need a priority in your company. That's a business continuity plan, disaster recovery plan, and an incident response plan. Dan talks about that information in the book. So I'm not going to go into a lot of details here because I'm actually helping Dan out here, and I want to promote that book because, as I said before, it's an excellent read, and I highly encourage everyone to pick that book up and start reading it. Those 3 things are so critical to what happens in your company if something bad does happen. Are you planning for it? What are you doing if it does occur? How are you going to continue business? And me coming from the last several years in healthcare, business continuity is huge. If you don't have business continuity going on in your hospital operations or your healthcare operations, then you have people's lives at stake. And then the other thing that I've noticed too, and Dan, you might have seen this, is there's a big difference between a business continuity plan and a disaster recovery plan. They might be playing out at the same time, but they're two separate types of plans. So, if you're wondering about that, get with your cyber team, get with your cyber leadership and have that discussion. Go back to the IT department and ask them about, what these plans entail. And then obviously an incident response plan in today's world is critical. How are you going to respond when something does happen? So that's the second thing. Make those 3 plans a priority. And then finally, I think it's really important to understand that cyber is not solely a technical problem. It's a whole company issue problem. And from an individual standpoint, it's not a technical problem. It's how you are using your computers at home and what you're doing to keep your computers upgraded. Dan or Andrew, you have any questions on that?
I think you said it very well.
I'll just add one thing, and that is that, to that point, we tell some different stories. And one of the things we mention is, communication. Who are you going to call? What are you going to do? Given different scenarios. So scenario planning in those areas a company-wide. What if the phones are down? What if the internet is down? What if, scenario-based planning around different businesses, functions. And I think that's a big piece of that. And like you said, it just doesn't affect IT. In fact, there may come a time when you have to run, when the power goes out, how are you going to run the business when the power goes out? Those kinds of things are all challenges that businesses face.
Very good. Dan, you have any final thoughts on this podcast?
I just want to thank you guys for having me. It's great to be on, and really, really appreciate your time.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Dan, for joining us. Andrew, thanks for the co-host. Appreciate it.
And thank you.
So that's the summary for episode number 1 with our guest, Mr. Dan Lohrmann. He had some great information and great recommendations in that episode. So if you haven't listened to that one, go check it out. You can listen to it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and we also have it on YouTube, or you can visit our website at 3pointcyber.com. So thanks for listening, and don't forget to check out the other episodes. Thank you for listening to 3 Point Cyber, a production from Alpha Omega Advisors. If you have questions about this episode or have a topic for discussion or a guest you would like us to have on, please email us at 3pointcyber@gmail.com. That's 3, the number 3, point, P-O-I-N-T, cyber, C-Y-B-E-R, all one word, 3pointcyber@gmail.com. We encourage you to share this podcast with others. This podcast is owned and produced by Alpha Omega Advisors. The theme song was created by music producer Andrew Van Wert in Nashville, Tennessee. This is Dave Summit, and until next time, keep on learning.